For years, Eustace Conway lived a life that seemed almost untouched by modern chaos. Known for his deep respect for nature and his commitment to self-reliance, he built a peaceful existence at Turtle Island Preserve. Visitors saw a man who valued simplicity, someone who taught traditional skills and encouraged people to reconnect with the land. His barn, standing quietly at the edge of the property, appeared no different from any other rustic structure. It held tools, supplies, and memories of decades spent outdoors. Yet those who knew him closely often felt there was more to the place than met the eye. Not in a sinister way, but in the sense that it carried stories, layers of experience, and perhaps a lifetime of careful documentation that Eustace preferred to keep private rather than explain to the outside world. The inspection that sparked curiosity. After a severe storm caused damage across the region, local officials arrived to inspect structures on the preserve for safety. When they reached the barn, they found it securely closed and more reinforced than expected. With responsibility to ensure everything was structurally sound, they eventually entered. Inside, the space felt less like a storage area and more like a carefully organized archive. There were labeled boxes, preserved materials, and handwritten notes that suggested years of observation and study. It wasn't alarming, but it was unexpected. Beneath a loose floorboard, they discovered a small hatch leading downward. This wasn't unusual for older rural properties where storage cellars were common, but it did raise questions about what Eustace had been keeping tucked away. The discovery shifted the tone from routine inspection to genuine curiosity about his private work. A hidden workspace. Below. The space beneath the barn turned out to be a modest underground room, thoughtfully arranged rather than chaotic. Shelves held jars of preserved plant samples, feathers, bones, and natural materials, items often used in environmental study or traditional learning. Nearby were journals filled with detailed notes and sketches documenting observations about wildlife, weather patterns, and human endurance in nature. It resembled the workspace of someone deeply committed to understanding the natural world. Tools on a wooden table suggested hands-on experimentation, though nothing appeared dangerous or illegal. Instead, it reflected a personal research space built over many years. For investigators, the real surprise wasn't what they found, but the level of dedication behind it. This was clearly not a hobby. It was a lifelong project rooted in curiosity, discipline, and a desire to learn beyond textbooks. Understanding Eustace's perspective. When Eustace arrived and saw officials examining the space, he didn't react with anger or panic. Instead, he seemed quietly disappointed, as though something personal had been exposed too soon. When asked about the items, he explained that everything had been collected and preserved intentionally. To him, the natural world held lessons that modern society often overlooked. His journals, he said, were a way of recording those lessons before they disappeared. While some found his approach unconventional, others recognized it as an extension of his philosophy, living close to nature and observing it deeply. He didn't claim to be a scientist in the formal sense, but his work showed discipline and consistency. What seemed unusual to outsiders was, in his eyes, simply a different way of learning and documenting the environment around him. The weight of long-term isolation, friends and family later reflected on how years of isolation may have shaped Eustace's habits. Living mostly alone in the wilderness requires a level of mental strength that few people truly understand. Over time, that solitude can also deepen one's internal world. Writing, observing, and building systems of thought become ways to stay connected and purposeful. Eustace's journals, filled with reflections on survival and adaptation, likely grew from this environment. Rather than seeing them as strange, It's more accurate to view them as the natural result of a life spent thinking deeply about existence outside of society's usual frameworks. His focus on endurance, resilience, and the relationship between humans and nature reflected both his lifestyle and his personal philosophy, shaped over decades of living in conditions most people never experience. Public reaction and misinterpretation. As news of the discovery spread, speculation quickly followed. Without full context, people began forming dramatic interpretations of what had been found. Social media amplified these ideas, often turning a simple story about a private research space into something far more sensational. Supporters of Eustace emphasized his long-standing reputation for honesty and education, while skeptics questioned why he had kept his work so private. In reality, the situation highlighted how easily unfamiliar lifestyles can be misunderstood. What one person sees as careful documentation, another might see as secrecy. The truth often lies somewhere in between. Eustace had never sought attention for this aspect of his life, and the sudden spotlight made it difficult for people to interpret his work fairly or accurately. A deeper look at his life's work. Looking beyond the headlines, the materials found in the barn tell a clearer story. They show a man who dedicated his life to studying the natural world in his own way. His collections of plants, bones, and environmental samples align with practices used in education and field study, especially in traditional or self-taught settings. His journals reveal consistency, curiosity, and a desire to understand how living systems adapt and survive. While his methods were unconventional, they were not without purpose. In many ways, his work reflects a blend of environmental awareness, anthropology, and personal philosophy. Rather than fitting into a single category, it represents a unique approach shaped by experience rather than formal structure, driven by observation instead of institutional guidelines. Balancing privacy and public life. Eustace Conway's story highlights a broader challenge faced by many individuals who live outside societal norms. When a private life suddenly becomes public, context is often lost. Personal spaces, especially those built over years, can be misinterpreted when viewed without understanding their purpose. For Eustace, the barn was never meant to be mysterious. It was simply a place where he could work, think, and preserve what he learned. The attention it received turned something deeply personal into a topic of debate. In the end, the situation serves as a reminder that not everything unfamiliar is dangerous or hidden for the wrong reasons. Sometimes it's just different. And understanding that difference requires patience, context, and a willingness to see beyond first impressions.